Hi, I'm hoping this will provide a quick review of our heredity unit. Who would have known what Tim's parents looked like? So this shows a picture of a karyotype. So remembering that each cell in our body contains 46 chromosomes. Remembering that those chromosomes are made up of DNA. So this would be a picture of the chromosomes from one cell in a body. And this would be one pair of chromosomes. This would be another pair of chromosomes, a third pair of chromosomes. And one pair that's important to look at is right down here. These are the sex chromosomes. And if you have two X chromosomes, you would be a female. If you have an X and a Y chromosome, that makes you a male, at least having female anatomy or male anatomy, even if you might not identify as male or female. So this shows an example of sexual reproduction. And as we're talking about our genetics unit, we are talking about two parents passing on their genes or their DNA to offspring. So in the case of egg and sperm production, that is sexual reproduction. So in this case, if these are the chromosomes that mom has and these are the chromosomes that dad has, mom is going to pass on one chromosome from each pair, one from each, into her egg cells. Dad is going to pass on one chromosome from each pair to his sperm cells, so that in the end, the offspring here end up with one chromosome from mom and one chromosome from dad in each pair. So 23 chromosomes come from mom, 23, and 23 chromosomes come from dad. So this is a close-up of two chromosomes. So let's say that this one here came from mom, this one here came from dad, and all along these chromosomes are genes. So if there's a gene for a specific trait, maybe hair color, there would be a gene related to hair color from dad. So if there's a gene for another trait here, there's a gene there. So all along these chromosomes are different genes, and each one of those genes would contain information for a specific trait that an individual could have. So on the next slide here, this shows some traits that people might have, and we're looking at a trait might be dominant or recessive. For example, cleft chin, widow's peak, dimples, brown or black hair, freckles, brown eyes, earlobes are all dominant traits. Whereas no cleft chin, no widow's peak, no dimples, blonde hair, no freckles, gray-blue eyes, and attached earlobes are all examples of recessive traits. So when we're talking about these dominant or recessive traits, let's get some chromosomes drawn on here. So let's say there's a gene located right here on this pair of chromosomes. And let's just say that that gene determines whether or not you can roll your tongue. So it's for tongue rolling. Now, you can have two different forms of a gene. Those are called alleles. So you could have an allele that is dominant because we represent dominant alleles with capital letters. And remember that dominant alleles are stronger than recessive alleles. So if we have, let's say, this individual has one dominant allele, they might have a recessive allele. Or it's possible that they could have, two recessive alleles. Or it's possible that they might have two dominant alleles. So here's an example of a trait, tongue rolling. And the physical trait, just a reminder, the physical trait is called the phenotype. And one way we remembered that was pheno is the physical trait. So some kind of characteristic that the person or other organism has. In this case, we're looking at tongue rolling. So if you can roll your tongue, tongue rolling is the dominant phenotype. And if you cannot roll your tongue, that is the recessive phenotype. So if we're looking at phenotypes and genotypes, this page we're going to look at different genotypes. Genotypes are the actual genes that are present. And one genotype that some might have is called homozygous dominant. Remember that homo means same. So a homozygous dominant genotype, let's use the letter R. So homozygous dominant would be two capital letters, two that are the same, and they're both dominant. If we have homozygous recessive, that means two of the same that are both recessive. So we'd have two lowercase r's. Hetero means different. So if we have two different alleles for that trait, we would have a dominant allele and a recessive allele. So let's go ahead and set up a Punnett square. Let's say that mom is heterozygous. So she has one dominant allele and one recessive allele. Reminder, can mom roll her tongue? Yes, mom can roll. So let's say that dad has two recessive alleles. So dad, since he does not have a dominant allele for tongue rolling, he cannot roll his tongue. So let's go ahead and set up this Punnett square. So mom could pass on a big R, or mom could pass on the recessive allele, the little r. Dad, he only has two recessive alleles, so he is for sure going to pass on a recessive allele to each child. So let's go ahead and cross this Punnett square. We're going to look at what's above and what's beside. And remember, we always write the capital letter first and the lowercase second. It's not wrong if you do it the other way. This is just the way it's generally written. So if we look at above and beside, above and beside, and down here we'd have two lowercase r's. So now let's go ahead and figure out, I'm going to just give us a little more space here. Let's figure out what percentage of the offspring, the children, would be able to roll their tongues. Well, in this case, we've got two different genotypes. We've got big R, little r, big R, little r. So if we're going to look at the genotypes, we would say that 50% have this genotype. And we would say that 50% have the homozygous recessive genotype. if we want to look at the phenotypes, we could say that, well, these two individuals would be able to roll their tongue because they have a dominant allele. So 50%, since it's 2 out of 4, can roll. And, oops, I forgot the percent sign. We could say that 1/2 or 50% cannot. Now, does that guarantee that half of their children would always be able to roll their tongue and half would not? No, of course not. This is just what we would expect. Kind of like flipping a coin. You expect it to be heads half the time, but that isn't always what happens. So hopefully this provided a quick review so you could review how to make Punnett squares and also some of the vocab for the unit. Thanks for listening.